of a German in the 16th century, looking at the two pictures. The one that will probably catch your eye and be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy, will probably be this one. So, sorry. So, that just goes to show how the different illustrations can evoke different emotions in the audience. Since you guys are AP seminar kids, this is very important when you're working with rare books. Putting books in conversation with each other is probably the most effective way that I have found to do research with rare books, is to find one rare book and another rare book, or multiple, more than just two, and putting them side by side and saying, okay, let's compare. Okay, now the last section that I'm going to talk about is the self-identification. So how Latin American peoples of modern time have started to define their identities themselves and take back their identities. So the first piece, has anybody in here read 100 Years of Solitude? Highly recommend it, it's amazing. I have my copy. This is nothing special, this was just on Amazon. But this copy that we have at the Bentley Rare Book Museum is a first edition English copy, published in 1970. What's important about this piece is that Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in writing this novel, as well as some of the other ones he has written, he is kind of like the name in Latin American, and especially classic Latin American literature and fiction. He defined a genre in this book specifically called magical realism, and he used that magical realism to tell the story of his own life growing up in a Colombian dictatorship. So I'm just kind of a very, very, very quick and very, very, very quick summary. The book starts with a community and a family, and throughout the book, the imperialist influences disrupt their peace, disrupt the community, disrupt the peace that they have. So it's not only a history of his life, but also a history of the way that Latin American lives have been influenced by the imperialism that we saw in the De Bride piece and the Florentine Codex. I do want to say that a lot of people probably would not consider this book rare. I mean, this one definitely isn't. That one's only really rare because it's a first edition. But that doesn't mean that when you're using rare books that you can't put other books in conversation with it. You don't have to have a first edition copy to make this point. So when you're doing research and making a research project, using modern day books is just as effective. Just like how these books were released pretty recently. Have any of you guys, or any of you familiar with these? No? I've read this one. This one's really good. This one was released just this year. Both are by Silvia Marina Garcia, and they are very, very similar in respect to Gabriel Garcia Marquez's works, as they cover issues of imperialism and eugenics and Latin American identities being shaped and shifted by Western culture from the perspective of a Latin American writer. So, I mean, you can use a book that came out a few months ago in conversation with rare books to make your points as well. The next piece, this was published in 1971. It's a short story collection of Puerto Rican short stories, a bunch of different authors. But what's important is that this is a copy of the first Puerto Rican short story collection that was translated into English. And the preface does a really great job of explaining its importance. Because of the Spanish language barrier, the voice of the Puerto Rican people, reflected by its literature, has not been widely enough heard in the United States or in other lands. So the purpose of this book is to show that simply by breaching the language barrier, simply by translating the short stories into English, this book, just in existing, has significant influence because it's being used to share the Latin American views of their own culture in order to share it with Western culture. Because English is a very widespread language, but it's also a very Western language. So it's the authors, or the publishers, the publishers of this book, their intention is to spread the Latin American definition of their own identities to kind of conflict with the long-held beliefs of the Western world. Next piece, this is a really cool piece. This is one of our most popular pieces in the Bentley Rare Book Museum. It's called Conjuros y Habilidades, which is conjuring spells and drinking songs. So this book, it looks pretty old, but it was actually made in 1997. It was handmade, completely handmade. Even the recipe for the plaster is an ancient plaster recipe. It was 100% handmade by Mayan women, specifically women who were involved in spirituality within their communities. And they, this was the first book in 500 years that was made 100% by the Mayan community. So in making this book, again, this is an example of the physical book, just in its existence, proving a point that the fact that this was made and this is being preserved and this is an important piece shows that Latin American people are kind of reclaiming their identities and physically making it themselves. You can also see in the illustrations, as well as in the literature, most of these are very spiritual songs. They're very culturally significant, but also, even though most people in America can't read this language, they included, they have Spanish on one side, but they included translations to Tzotzil, which is an ancient Mayan language. So not only are they sharing their culture in a way that we can understand, but they're also sharing their culture in their language, which is different from the Puerto Rican short stories, which on the sheets I passed out, one of the questions I asked was about, for the Puerto Rican short stories, was about language, and is it okay to sacrifice the language, which is such an important piece of culture, in order to spread the ideas that are trying to be spread? But in this case, you're not sacrificing the language. You're showing the language and almost putting the language in conversation with the language that you can understand. So the last piece that I'm going to show you, I wanted to put in an art book because just like rare books, art is a very good piece to use, or a very good resource to use for your research projects. Now this is an art book, so it is a book, but in 1965 this was published, and what's important about this piece and what I want to convey through this piece is all of these pieces currently reside in Mexican museums. Is anyone here familiar with like the whole debate about Western culture stealing, seeing a lot of nods, stealing artifacts from what they consider primitive cultures? Yeah, I think that was like the whole plot of Black Panther or something. But this is a book, and it doesn't say on any of the pictures that I included here, but there is kind of mention of that in on the inside of this book, talking about how what's very important about this is that these books, or this book is meant to share, but the pieces are still in their home. The pieces are still in the place where they belong, but that doesn't mean that the museums are keeping the information all for themselves. They want to spread the word about their pieces, but they want the analysis of the pieces to be their analysis instead of Western analysis, which could differ, as we've seen in DeBry. So the takeaways from this, pretty simple takeaway. It's not revolutionary, but imperialistic Western ideas influenced negatively Latin American identities and distorted the identities to be like completely untrue, to the point where our maps are wrong, to the point where, I mean, the first book is called Indians of South America. The name itself is inaccurate. I mean, anybody who knows the history of Christopher Columbus knows that. But that now in the modern world, Latin American people themselves are learning, or not learning, are beginning to define their identities themselves. So that's the end of my presentation, but I do just want to stress that if anybody has any interest in learning how to use rare books for their research, please do not be afraid to reach out to me. This is a great resource. It's a very impressive resource for professors and teachers and all that, but it's also incredibly fun and enjoyable to do the research and to work with these materials. And you're literally working with artifacts. So yeah, please let me know if you guys are interested in doing this for your own research projects. And I hope that you guys maybe come to KSU, see the Bentley Rare Book Museum. There are a bunch of rare book museums, mostly in universities. Emory has a huge one. Yeah, I hope you guys are convinced that this is a good resource to use, and I hope you'll use this in your research projects.
Thank you.